On this Friday night from Rome, the new Pope's first Mass.
I invite you to recognize the marvels that the Lord has done.
His warning to cardinals and the hopes he can help unify Catholics. Renewed demands to right a wrong.
These belongings were stolen from Indigenous communities.
The calls for the new pontiff to honor his predecessor's promise. Canadian jobs turfed by American tariffs.
The long-term projections are much more unstable.
What it might mean for interest rates. Plus, the pomp and pageantry of Russia's Victory Day parade, China's prominent presence, and the ominous message from the Russian president.
Global National. Reporting tonight from Rome, Jeff Semple.
Good evening and thank you for joining us from Rome. We are just steps from the Vatican, where Pope Leo gave his first Mass as pontiff today, an intimate service in the Sistine Chapel attended by the College of Cardinals. And in an unusual move, he addressed them in English.
Through the ministry of Peter, you have called me to carry that cross and to be blessed with that mission.
The Pope called for the cardinals to support him in his new mission as leader of the Catholic Church. Formerly known as Robert Prevost, he grew up in Chicago, where today one of his brothers described how he got here and where he might take the papacy.
From the time he was 5 or 6 years old, he knew this was his fate. Not that he would be a pope, that he would be a priest. He's going to follow in Pope Francis's footsteps because he knows there are the downtrodden. He knows there are the poor. He knows there are the disenfranchised, the people who don't have a voice.
Pope Leo shares many similarities with Pope Francis, including their South American connections and advocating for the poor. Redmond Shannon begins our coverage tonight.
Just 2 years ago, the man born Robert Prevost was not yet even a cardinal. On Friday morning, he led the private Mass in the Sistine Chapel as Pope Leo XIV.
I know I can rely on each and every one of you to walk with me.
The first pope from an English-speaking country in almost 9 centuries.
Et omnes salutaris effici.
The long-time missionary addressing cardinals in the very hall they elected him, with a warning that power and wealth are replacing faith.
I was very, very touched, moved, and it's a big responsibility.
On Friday, Canadian cardinals reflected on this week's conclave.
Either in movies or in media from people on the outside, well, they can't grasp the beauty of how we experience this on the inside.
Many here in the Vatican are still digesting the fact that the cardinals elected a pope from the United States.
Could see the white smoke and it was just amazing. It was like a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
Layla Brown from Seattle didn't realize the Pope was a fellow American until her mom called.
She said, "Layla, it's an American Pope." And I was just like, are you serious? It's an American. I was just shocked.
Vatican expert Inez San Martin believes the Pope's dual US-Peruvian nationality may prove an ideal bridge to help unite the Church.
And just as a cherry on top, he spent the last 2 years working in the Roman Curia, meaning he knows enough about the system without really having been in the system long enough to have become a part of it.
And we will hear directly from Pope Leo himself when he speaks with journalists Monday. Jeff?
Redmond Shannon in Rome. Thanks, Red. Canadian Cardinal Thomas Collins was one of the 133 cardinals who were in the conclave. I spoke with him earlier on that process and what he thinks of the new pontiff.
Cardinal Collins, lovely to see you. Thank you for doing this. How are you feeling?
Tired, but also thrilled. This is my second time I've had the awesome privilege of being in a conclave, and it's a intense experience. I find the most moving thing is that procession into the conclave, and then you make a turn. Oh my, there it is! It's the last judgment of Michelangelo, right there. You go up and bow, and then you swear the oath, and then shut the doors, conclave with a key. There's no one in the Sistine Chapel except the voting cardinal. Then we just began with holding it up, going up. It's quite awesome.
So you're sworn to secrecy, so we won't ask you what happened inside, but we can ask you about the result.
Pope Leo.
Yeah.
What do you think?
First of all, picking the name Leo. Wow. That's the more significant than the fact that he's an American, which I don't think it occurs to anyone. Well, it does occur to people, but not the cardinals. Leo XIII was such an astonishing pope when it comes to social justice, as he's famous for. And so I think that he chose that name, I think, is very profound.
Did you go into it with a notion of who it could be, should be, or?
Well, I mean, I thought of different ones. I've been doing my sort of due diligence of trying to learn, and I study up on different people, talk with others. But and of course, in the news are always doing these: who's the front runner, who's the second runner? None of which actually turns out to have anything to do with what we're. I mean, there's a world of kind of artificial conclaves in the media and the movies, and then there's the real thing, which is just like another world, totally different. It's really very spiritual. Well, as you'd hope it would be. It's just very intense.
Canadian Cardinal Thomas Collins on his second conclave experience. I'll be back from Rome a little later in the newscast, but for now, it's over to Neethu Garcha with the rest of today's news.
All right, thanks very much for that, Jeff. There are new signs tonight that Canada's economy is starting to feel the strain from U.S. tariffs. Our country added 7,400 jobs in April. That's slightly better than expected, but the unemployment rate ticked up from 6.7 to 6.9%. Some of the gains were temporary hires for the federal election, masking a significant drop in manufacturing and other sectors. Heather Yourex-West looks at the trends and which provinces are being hardest hit.
In this Calgary warehouse, 3CI Manufacturing is bucking the trend, adding a handful of jobs last month to produce cables used across several industries, though its growth plans have slowed.
The long-term projections are much more unstable with a number of the things that are going on. We just are being slower to make decisions, and I think you will see us being slower to fill positions.
It's why economists expect the job losses posted in April are just the start, as U.S. tariffs take a toll. Across the country, Ontario has been hardest hit, losing 35,000 jobs, mostly in the manufacturing sector. Nova Scotia lost 8,500 jobs too. Meanwhile, Quebec, Alberta, Manitoba, and Newfoundland and Labrador saw job numbers rise, though experts caution these gains don't tell the whole story.
Below the surface, most of the jobs added in April were in public administration, largely due to temporary workers supporting the Canadian federal election.
Many of the jobs lost have been in the auto sector. In Windsor, Ontario last month, the unemployment rate hit 10.7%.
We saw plant closures and layoffs already being announced. But across the board, what we're seeing is a weaker global backdrop. The U.S. economy is slowing, global economy is slowing, and that's not good for any exporter.
Commodity prices, including oil, are sagging as well. The Bank of Canada taking it all into consideration ahead of the next interest rate announcement on June 4th. The likeliness of a rate cut rising, the more Canada's job numbers fall. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
The damage dealt by tariffs and President Donald Trump's threats to Canada's sovereignty have only soured U.S.-Canada relations. Yet Trump's new ambassador to Canada insists the White House is seeking a mostly fresh start with its closest neighbor. Our Ottawa bureau chief, Mercedes Stevenson, spoke with him earlier today. Mercedes, what did he have to say?
Neethu, Ambassador Pete Hoekstra is a confidant of President Trump with a special connection to Canada. Hoekstra was born in the Netherlands, and his parents were liberated by Canadian soldiers at the end of the Second World War, an anniversary that Canada and the Netherlands are celebrating right now. A former congressman from Michigan, Hoekstra knows about the vital relationship between our two countries and also says he has family here in Canada. With this new warmer tone, the ambassador said the White House wants to move forward rapidly to develop a new trade deal with Canada, revealing that the desire for a kind of NAFTA 3.0 is a bigger driver of tariffs for President Trump than either fentanyl or border security. But even if a deal is achieved, some tariffs may be here to stay.
I'm not sure they'll be totally removed. I mean, we saw this week, we saw that another country that believes they have a special relationship with the United States, the UK and Canada, or UK and America, we announced a trade agreement this week. In some ways, it's kind of a framework, an example of where we will be moving in the future. But we got that done in a little over 100 days with the UK. Now that there's a government in Canada, hopefully we will get to an agreement relatively quickly.
We'll have more on military spending, the 51st state comments, and the new relationship between the president and the prime minister Sunday on the West Block. Neithu?
All right, Mercedes Stevenson in Ottawa. Thanks, Mercedes. After less than a week on the job, the new interim leader of the NDP says his party is fending off a fresh electoral attack from the Liberals in a bid for Mark Carney to try and secure a majority government. Our Mackenzie Gray spoke with Don Davies today. Mackenzie?
After Mark Carney fell 3 seats short of forming a majority, Neithu, the newly minted NDP interim leader, says the Liberals have come knocking to try and poach NDP MPs.
I do know that there's been certain calls made by Liberals. I would probably describe them more as feelers that have been put out.
But Don Davies believes none of the 7 elected New Democrats will cross the floor to the Liberals.
Our caucus, NDP caucus colleagues, have committed to being strong, united New Democrats.
We asked the Prime Minister's office if they're trying to pick off any NDP MPs, but they had no comment. While calls like these are likely taking place, Davies and Carney have yet to speak. But when they do, Davies said his first focus will be asking Carney to give the NDP official party status in Parliament, which they lost after failing to get 12 MPs elected. Status would give the NDP regular speaking slots during question period, seats on committees, and money to hire additional staff. Now, one thing both Davies and Carney are not keen on, Neithu, signing a formal governing pact like the supply and confidence deal that was previously signed under Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh.
All right, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa. Thanks, Mackenzie. The female complainant at the center of a sexual assault trial against 5 former members of Canada's World Junior Hockey team returned to the stand for a 6th straight day. The now 27-year-old was cross-examined about the events at a downtown London, Ontario bar in 2018 and faced questions about her alcohol consumption the night of the alleged assault. Sean O'Shea was in the courtroom today and brings us the latest.
The defendants passing demonstrators on their way into a London courtroom. Michael McLeod, Dylan Dubé, Carter Hart, Cal Foote, and Alex Formanton.
Sorry, is it you today or is it your alter ego?
His lawyer, Daniel Brown, came face to face with one of the women holding a sign.
I guess we'll find out, eh?
What's inside? A short exchange a day after Brown suggested the complainant, who can only be referred to as EM, had an alter ego and was known as Fun EM. The 5 former members of Canada's 2018 World Junior Hockey team have all pleaded not guilty to sexual assault. EM alleged she was made to have sex with a man in a second-floor hotel room after having consensual sex with Michael McLeod. Text messages from McLeod showed him inviting other players to his room for sex with EM. There she said she was made to have sex on the floor and elsewhere, that she was spat on, slapped to the point of pain, and felt she couldn't leave out of fear and because she was drunk. But lawyer Brown suggested EM wasn't as drunk as she said she was at this London bar where she first met some of the players on trial. She said she'd consumed 8 Jagerbomb shots and 4 other alcoholic drinks over the course of the evening. Brown held up a conventional shot glass and a smaller kind used that night at Jack's bar to demonstrate the difference in volume, suggesting they contained just half the alcohol she led jurors to believe. You buy these 2 at a time. They're a ½ ounce each. EM replied, I wouldn't know that's misleading. I thought it was the same quantity. EM admitted she had lapses in her memory. She says while she didn't expressly say no to the men that night, she says she's telling the truth the best she can 7 years later. Neithu.
Sean O'Shea in London, Ontario. Thanks, Sean. In Toronto, police arrested the suspected driver of an alleged vehicle attack at Toronto Metropolitan University last month. 23-year-old Ryan Petroff was arrested yesterday on a number of outstanding warrants. He's accused of driving his car onto a pedestrian walkway. 5 people were hurt. Police say 3 of the victims were struck by the vehicle. Petroff faces 24 charges, including attempted murder, dangerous driving, and leaving the scene of an accident. Pomp and power coming up. The message Russia's president wanted to send with his country's Victory Day parade. Russian President Vladimir Putin welcomed more than 20 world leaders to Moscow for the country's Victory Day parade and commemorations, marking the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. Russia's alliance with China was on full display. The parade, held during the middle of a 3-day ceasefire, Putin himself declared. But as Vincent McAviney reports, Ukraine has already accused the Kremlin of breaking it.
There is nothing subtle about Vladimir Putin's Victory Day parade in Red Square. Thousands of soldiers, hundreds of armoured vehicles, and for the first time, the drones they've been using to pummel Ukraine. Through his tenure, Putin has turned this parade into a spectacle. Now he's trying to tie victory over the Nazis in the Second World War with his invasion of Ukraine. Russia has been and will continue to be an indestructible wall against Nazism. Our whole country, society and people support the participants of the special military operation.
Since he has to draw more Russian youth into military service, he's also saying to them, look at the glory that awaits you.
A projection of force, but the bigger signal was sent out from the stands. In 2022, just after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, foreign leaders stayed away. Last year, 9 attended. This year, it was up to 27. A sign that Russia's international isolation is decreasing despite the war continuing. Of those who had travelled, Chinese President Xi Jinping received the most attention. Despite his frustrations with Putin's lack of engagement on ceasefire talks, the pageantry will likely impress President Trump. But with rising economic problems at home, Putin is still in a precarious position. Vincent McAviney, Global News, London.
High-stakes trade talks between the U.S. and China. Ahead, what shoppers should expect. Talks between China and the U.S. are set to begin in Geneva this weekend to resolve a trade war sparked by U.S. President Trump's enormous tariffs on Chinese imports. The dispute between the world's two biggest economies has already wreaked havoc on markets and supply chains. Yet, as Jackson Proskow reports, Trump appears dead set on finding any sort of victory.
America's ports are eerily quiet. In Los Angeles, cargo ship traffic is down 35%.
That's a number that actually exceeds the numbers that we had during COVID-19, which was a very critical period or a crisis to the supply chain.
President Donald Trump's 145% tariff on imports from China has all but shut down trade. Ahead of scheduled talks between the two countries in Geneva this weekend, Trump posted on social media that the tariff on China should be reduced to 80%, still astronomical.
As for the 80% number, that was a number the president threw out there, and we'll see what happens this weekend.
Even if there's a deal, there's no expectation shipments to the U.S. will come roaring back.
We're going to see empty shelves at Walmart, at Target, at Macy's. This is just unprecedented in the United States, and I would guess it would impose a huge political cost on the Trump administration.
In fact, the White House appeared to undercut negotiations, announcing some level of tariff is here to stay, after Thursday's deal between the U.S. and U.K. maintained a blanket 10% tariff on most goods.
The president is committed to the 10% baseline tariff, not just for the United Kingdom, but for his trade negotiations with all other countries as well.
It's Trump's desire to claim a win that may ultimately be the best hope for a reprieve. The president has been willing to take credit for solving a crisis he created.
So it's a bit like setting a house on fire and then offering to put out the fire.
So far, no sign the White House is willing to change course, leaving American consumers to feel the pinch of shortages and higher prices. Jackson Proskow, Global News, Washington.
Next, will Pope Leo return thousands of Indigenous artifacts housed in the Vatican Museum? Jeff will rejoin us from Rome after the break.
Welcome back to Rome. Pope Leo's predecessor, Francis, made significant progress building bridges with Indigenous peoples in Canada. He promised to return thousands of priceless Indigenous artifacts stored at the Vatican. The Holy See has long claimed that those artifacts were gifts. Now, Indigenous leaders are calling on Pope Leo to fulfill his predecessor's promise.
The Vatican museums are among the world's most popular, attracting around 6 million visitors each year. But one exhibit is garnering attention for the wrong reasons.
These belongings were stolen from Indigenous communities.
Gloria Bell is a Canadian art historian with Métis ancestry. She says these artifacts were taken from Indigenous communities across Canada 100 years ago by Catholic missionaries.
Pope Pius XI, he sent out this call to missions around the globe, and he said, send in anything and everything related to Indigenous life. I want it all, I want it now.
In 1925, they were put on display as part of the Vatican's Missionary Exhibition, a huge promotional event. The artifacts have since become a permanent collection. The Vatican Museum calls them gifts.
Indigenous children that were held against their will in residential schools, and then their materials were put on display in this exhibition as, quote, trophies of the Pope.
In 2022, a delegation of Indigenous leaders were invited to Rome to meet the Pope to discuss reconciliation. Vatican officials privately showed them the artifacts, including this rare sealskin kayak.
It was very moving.
The president of the Métis National Council was on the delegation.
You couldn't help but feel that tug, in your heart that those items should be back home.
In 2022, Pope Francis promised to return these thousands of artifacts to the Indigenous people of Canada, who now worry that promise may die with him.
Well, it could just be swept under the rug.
The decision to return the artifacts now rests with the new Pope. The Canadian cardinals and the conclave that elected him today held a press conference.
The Indigenous artifacts that are now in the Vatican, will those artifacts be returned?
The artifacts situation is something that I know is underway, that's on reflection. Let's let things unfold, but I'm sure he'll be interested in that.
What an important symbol of reconciliation returning them will be.
And that is Global National for this Friday. I'm Jeff Semple. We leave you tonight with images from the past few days, historic ones here as the new pontiff was selected, Pope Leo XIV. Thanks for watching. Good night from Rome.